Hello, and thanks for joining me. This is the second part of my review of the book God Is by Almando L. Calvo, aka Christrighteous. It covers the second part of the first chapter. If you haven't seen the first part of this series, I recommend you check that out first, as it covers a great deal of necessary, or at least interesting, context for what we're dealing with in this self-published work of Christian apologetics. When we left off in the last video, Calvo was attacking science. We pick things up in the very next paragraph, where Calvo tries to invoke science to prove that the universe had a beginning.
That's weird. So where was I? Oh, that's right.
He cites the first law of thermodynamics as stating that the total quantity of mass energy is always the same. In other words, matter and energy can be neither created nor destroyed, only converted to another form. This, of course, precludes the existence of God. If mass energy cannot be created, then it cannot be created by God. The existence of a creator of mass energy precludes the truth of the first law of thermodynamics, which makes this argument pretty awkward, doesn't it? And this also answers the way in which Calvo tries to make the argument. Since the total quantity of mass energy in the universe is always the same, what is sustaining this constant quantity? Why doesn't it just randomize? Which, of course, is like saying, why does the planet Earth keep going in a circle around the sun? Why doesn't it just fly off somewhere? Why should the Earth do that? Why should the sum total of mass energy just randomize? Why would we expect that? Calvo asks, what are holding these laws together? Again, I'm reading this exactly as he wrote it. So this is just another way of asking, where did the laws of the universe, or the regularities that we observe in nature, come from? And to answer that question, we can give the exact same possible answers that are available to Calvo and to other apologists when confronting the question of why, to put it into Calvo's rather bizarre terms, the various attributes of the God who created these laws always stay the same and don't just randomize. In Calvo's view, those attributes are either necessary attributes of a necessarily existing being, or they are the way they are simply as a brute fact without explanation. Alternatively, we can ask, what is the ultimate reason that God creates these laws as they are? If it's because, say, he wants to create humans to glorify him, then why is it the case that he wants that? If it's because his glory demands it, then why is that the case? And so on. Ultimately, you're going to come up against the exact same dilemma. Either it is necessarily true that this is the case, or it is a brute, unexplained fact that this is the case. If those answers are acceptable, then it is easily acceptable to say that the laws of nature that we observed, or the natural features from which they ultimately derive, are either necessarily existing entities or brute, unexplained facts. Since the Christian and the atheist are ultimately going to confront the exact same dilemma in the end, all else being equal, we should prefer whichever worldview posits the fewest primitive entities, and that clearly is atheism. So much for the first law of thermodynamics. Now Calvo turns to the second law. If the universe is winding down, who wound it up? He screams in all caps. We'll just go ahead and call it a stylistic choice. If the available energy in the universe is constantly decreasing, he's asking, then how did it ever increase if not through the intervention of a god? The answer is, we don't know. Which is not an excuse to say that it must have been God. It is possible that God wound it up, or it would be if it were possible for God to exist, which it isn't, but those arguments are beyond the scope of this video, so we'll just say here that it's possible. But it is possible is not an option for the Christian. Why? Because I have attended many church services in my life, and never once, not one single time, have I heard the congregation intone, Our Father, who possibly art in heaven, hallowed might be thy name, thy kingdom perhaps come, thy will be done with a probability greater than 0, on earth as it is in heaven. Maybe. Christians don't believe that God might have been the one who wound it up. Christians believe that God is the one who wound it up. So they don't do their position any favors by saying that God might have been the one to wind it up. So let's say it's possible God wound it up. Does the second law of thermodynamics rule out all other possible answers? No, it doesn't, because the second law has not applied for the entire lifetime of the observed universe. Like all laws of nature, it began to apply only after, well after, in terms of pre-inflationary physics, the initial state of the universe. It could be that, since different rules obtained, the winding up happened naturally. It could also be that the initial quantity of order in the universe, the quantity equal to an entropy of 0, is exactly that, the initial quantity. Again, as far as science can currently take us, the ultimate explanation for this phenomenon comes down to either necessary truth or brute fact. And again, since those are the same two choices available to the Christian when explaining God, Christianity and atheism are on equal footing, and we should prefer whichever worldview is more parsimonious. Calvo now turns to the law of cause and effect. He starts by saying that no effect can be greater than its cause. This is not true in any meaningful way. The First World War was certainly greater than the 19-year-old kid who shot Archduke Ferdinand. This thread, however, like many threads that apparently just look good to Calvo at the moment, is left dangling. It is not followed up on. The universe had a beginning, Calvo goes on to say, and could not have caused itself. Well, first of all, there are theoretical models under which the universe could have caused itself using a phenomenon known as retrocausation. And before Calvo dismisses that, he should know that one of his inspirations for his book, William Lane Craig, has spilled a lot of ink arguing for the logical and metaphysical possibility of retrocausation, which he believes is a theological necessity. How else could God have perfect foreknowledge of my having had eggs for breakfast, unless my having eggs created the information that I had had eggs, which information then travels back in time to God in the past, giving him that knowledge? This doesn't rescue the compatibility of free will and divine foreknowledge, by the way, but that's something I cover in another video. Also, this argument that the universe could not have caused itself assumes that the Kalam cosmological argument has been successful, and so we need to look for a cause. But so far he has not successfully argued for the second premise of the argument, that the universe began to exist, and he has made no explicit attempt to argue for the first premise, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Throughout this video, I have spoken of the observed universe as having had an original state, but the key word there is observed. It's the part of the universe that we can see and describe with scientific models. It may or may not be the entire universe, meaning the entire domain of non-supernatural causes and effects that now exist or have ever existed. There are models which describe how phenomena which exist in our observed universe, such as black holes, might in fact give rise to new universes, universes which would share nothing in common with our universe except its own initial state. Here's how you might visualize this. Imagine you have an infinitely stretchy balloon. You blow air into the balloon, inflating it. Then, standing inside the balloon, well, say you have an air hose, you take a small section of the surface of the balloon and blow air into that, thus creating a second balloon that grows off of the first. Then you stand in the second balloon, blow into a section of that, and create a third balloon, and so on. You can create an infinite number of balloons from a single balloon. Now, of course, you can ask, where did the balloon come from? Where did the air come from? Who's doing the blowing? And so on. But this ultimately takes us back to the dilemma of necessary existence or brute fact. The point of this whole section is that saying that the universe we observe is the only universe is like saying the one balloon we're looking at is the only balloon. It may be the case, it may not. We just don't know. Yet. But we can't conclude from the fact that the observed universe has an initial state that the entire universe, the entire natural causal domain, had an absolute beginning in time. It may have. It may not have. Since Calvo is making a cosmological argument here, the burden is his to show that it did, and so far, he hasn't. However, in the next section, he finally makes a stab at demonstrating the first premise of the argument, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. He tries to show it by the principle of ex nihilo nihil fit, or out of nothing nothing comes. He spends a lot of time here talking about the quantum vacuum, which he calls QV, I'm guessing because his source called it QV. Here's what he states, and again, I swear I'm not making this up. If you were to argue that the quantum vacuum was the pre-existing energy from the beginning, then you still have a case of a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and moral sum of energy with the capacity to create things out of nothing. This QV must have had a mind and will to be able to create the universe. So, this is going to be one of those places where I let my exasperation show. Why in the blue hell does he assert that the quantum vacuum, which is a temporal spatial phenomenon, must be timeless and spaceless? It's clearly an impersonal and therefore amoral entity, so why does he assert that it must be personal and moral? The only possible answer is he needs the quantum vacuum to be these things in order for his argument to work, in order to rule out the possibility of the quantum vacuum being fundamental to reality, which would preclude the necessity of a creator God. But wanting something to be so doesn't make it so. Time, space, and matter, he writes, still had a beginning regardless of who and what did it. But Calvo has yet to demonstrate this. He says the quantum vacuum could not have been the cause because, quoting again, this theory seems to move in a direction and function in a way that only something outside of it with a mind and will could have ordered it to go. It doesn't seem that way to me. I don't think it seems that way to any non-apologist. If I were deliberately manipulating a vacuum field in some way, and if I chose to make a universe that way, despite being omnipotent and, therefore being able to directly will any state of affairs I wanted, I can't imagine why I would make a universe in which mind exists only as a byproduct, a phenomenon on at most a few isolated planets in a few scattered galaxies in a few dusty corners of the universe. Anyway, the quantum vacuum idea is really incidental to this thing, because when apologists and most non-apologist philosophers talk of something coming out of nothing, they mean a philosophical nothing. And that's why nothing comes from nothing is indefensible from an empirical point of view. We don't have a philosophical nothing to observe to see if anything comes out of it. Even if we saw bicycles or babies or Billings, Montana appear out of thin air, they would be coming from exactly that, thin air, or from a temporal spatial vacuum, not from a philosophical nothing. So the fact that we have never seen something come from nothing is trivial, and does not establish that nothing comes from nothing. For more on this subject, see my video, Atheism, Theism, and Nothing. Calvo then cites Hubble's law. He states that Hubble's law establishes that the universe had an absolute beginning. It doesn't. At most, it establishes that the observed universe had an absolute beginning. And really all it establishes is that the material in the universe was once much closer together than it is now. He then states that the initial state of the observed universe was, and this is a direct quote, absolutely nothing. This is false. He probably derives this from someone on the web who read somewhere that the initial state of the universe may have been a zero-dimensional point and thought, this means absolutely nothing. It doesn't. Calvo then provides a few quotes from described former atheists who came to God based on what Calvo calls honest scientific observations. The former atheists he quotes are Fred Hoyle, Alan Sandage, and Jean-Paul Sartre. I'm not good at pronouncing French, but I'm going to say that last name again. Jean-Paul Sartre. Even a small amount of research, even a glance at Wikipedia, would have told Calvo that Sartre was not a scientist. He did not make scientific observations. The quote provided, which begins, "I do not feel I am the product of chance," concerns exactly that. His feelings. His deathbed conversion to theism may well have been genuine, assuming the one and only person who reported the conversion and who provided this quote to the world can be relied upon, but it was in no way based on scientific observations, still less on Hubble's law. If we are just honest with all of our observations and studies, Calvo writes, we can see that the evidence leads to a creator. We've already discussed Calvo's penchant for calling an entire creed a bunch of liars. Not the first time he does this, won't be the last. Man, I don't know how Logicked managed to do 5 full-length videos on this guy and still keep his sanity. I guess
sanity? That's been gone for years. I don't know what's left, but there's no sanity left there for Christrighteous to damage. You'll find out what I mean. Give it a few years of this, you'll see.
Oh, well, that's fair enough. I guess it'll... Wait, a few years?
You'll see.
Okay, well, I guess I'll worry about that later. Now, Calvo turns to the contingency argument. Wait, what? The contingency argument? I thought this whole thing was about the Kalam argument. 1 second, let me flip to the end of the chapter. Yeah, he finishes the chapter by summarizing the Kalam argument. So why in the blue hell does he go into a completely different argument? The answer is, he's just throwing out things that look good to him. In case it isn't clear by now, this chapter does not constitute an organized, cohesive argument for anything, still less the existence of God. Rather, it's just Calvo saying, this proves that God exists, and this proves that God exists, and this proves that God exists, and atheists are all liars, and this proves that God exists. He's basically the Oprah of Christian apologetics. Anyway, we're talking about the contingency argument now, for some reason, and in particular, we're talking about Steve's contingency argument. That's literally what it's called, Steve's contingency argument. Steve refers to a guy on the internet named Steve Duvall, whose contingency argument for the existence of God was posted in the form of an infographic, a meme, which Calvo copied literally word for word and did not even bother to credit the source. Because who cares about a little thing like plagiarism when you're doing God's work, am I right? Anyway, this argument is easy enough to answer. It does not establish the impossibility or even the improbability of an infinite regress of contingent events, nor of an initial material state of affairs, which is either necessary or brutally contingent, that is, something which neither is necessary nor has an explanation. Again, these are the same two options that theists have when explaining why God is existent rather than non-existent. So the contingency argument gives us no reason to prefer theism over naturalism. Calvo says, no other theory could possibly fit with the evidence. No matter where they turn, they have to deal with an uncaused first cause. But Calvo has failed to rule out the possibility of an infinite regress, and he has also failed to rule out the possibility of the uncaused first cause, if there was one, being a temporal, spatial, and material state of affairs. There's absolutely nothing other than your Christian intuitions which rules that out. So Calvo has presented no difficulties to atheism so far. We're reaching the end of the chapter, and so this is part of the process of Calvo summing up what has been said so far. In his mind, certainly, he has presented an insoluble puzzle for atheists, but only in his mind. When I sing in the shower, when there's nobody but me and a room with good acoustics, it's easy for me to delude myself into thinking that I'm a good singer. I'm not. I mean, I'm not too terrible, but I wouldn't make it a single round in a network talent show. Almando Calvo has done everything in his power, short of not being on social media, to be alone in a room with good acoustics, metaphorically speaking. He has repeatedly stated that he does not watch the videos of those who criticize him. He consistently blocks those who leave critical comments on his channel. There is no indication that he has read a single article or book by an atheist. When someone left a critical review of his book on Lulu, he arranged for the comment to be deleted. The comments which are allowed to exist on his videos and on his Lulu store are invariably uncritical and laudatory. There's no reason to think that he does not place similar filters on his private communications. To put it quite simply, he has built an echo chamber around himself. This is something that we're going to see crop up over and over as we go through this book. Calvo saying things, expressions of confidence and declarations of victory that he would not even think about saying if he opened himself up to even a modest amount of criticism. Living as he does in this echo chamber, it's understandable that Calvo has deluded himself into thinking that his arguments are good and cannot be answered by atheists. We cannot help this. We cannot pull him out of the echo chamber. And that is essentially why this video and its sequels are in no way intended for Calvo's benefit, but for the benefit of others. Even a small crack in the echo chamber might perhaps have prevented Calvo from making the incredible blunder he makes later in this paragraph, when he says that whatever the uncaused first cause is, it has to be big. His word, big. The word big means being relatively large in spatial dimensions. And if you have spatial dimensions, then you are a spatial entity. But he already told us several times in this chapter, wrongly, that there must be a spaceless creator or a non-spatial creator who created the universe. Whatever quality of God Calvo was trying to convey when he called God big, it would have been the work of 10 or 15 seconds to find an alternate word, a more accurate word, had he allowed such a piece of feedback to be able to get through to him. How can Calvo expect to become an effective apologist if he so carefully remains ignorant of the positions and criticisms of his opponents? One possible answer is he has no intention of becoming an effective apologist, but only a guy who can say he's an apologist, and point to things like a YouTube channel and a published book to prove it. In other words, he's not glorifying God, he's glorifying Almando Calvo. Another possible answer is he simply doesn't realize that this is how the world works, that this is the necessary work that you must do in order to become an effective advocate for any position. So if anyone's watching this whom Calvo has not blocked on social media and who wishes to see Calvo become more effective, consider ever so gently guiding him to this video. And now finally we come to Calvo's summary of the Kalam cosmological argument, except it's not. It's not Calvo's summary of the Kalam cosmological argument. It's Steve's summary of the Kalam cosmological argument. That's right, the same Steve whose contingency argument Calvo ripped off earlier. Look, I don't want to be blaming the victim here because Steve doesn't deserve to be exploited like this, but when you do what Steve does, which is to make his arguments widely available in infographic form, i.e. as a meme, then this is the kind of low-effort, low-engagement audience you attract. I wonder how much more of Steve I'll see as I progress through the book. But if Calvo actually understood the arguments he was making earlier, and if he actually understood the summary that Steve is presenting here, he would know that they have nothing to do with each other, that the latter is in no way a summary of the former. This is the problem with plagiarizing material that you don't understand, that just looks good to you. It's obvious to anyone who reads it that you don't understand your own material, and that makes you look foolish. Anyway, Steve actually makes a stronger case for the Kalam than whoever Calvo has been ripping off so far. Calvo, or rather Steve, argues that something cannot come from nothing because nothing has no potentiality, and therefore no ability to bring anything into existence. But in the first place, if there was never a time in which a state of nothing obtained, then it has never been necessary for something to come from nothing. And in the second place, there are models of causality which don't require potentiality in the causally prior state. These models basically state that if something fails to come into existence, then it is because some condition or rule or force prevented it from coming into existence. Under this model of causation, if for some reason there was a state of absolute philosophical nothingness, then something begins to exist because something can't help but begin to exist. This certainly comports with our everyday notion of potentiality. When we say he has the potential to become a dancer, we mean there is nothing stopping him from becoming a dancer. Then Calvo, or rather Steve, argues that the scientific evidence points to a beginning of the universe. It doesn't. At best, it points to a beginning of the observed universe. Then Calvo, or rather Steve, argues that an actual infinity cannot exist because it would never change no matter how much you counted it. And therefore, since the universe changes, the universe cannot be eternal. But first of all, this is a misunderstanding of what it means for an infinity to never change. It means the total number of objects in an infinity can never change even when you add and subtract objects. This is because, quite simply, infinities are weird. The number of digits of pi is infinite, not potentially infinite, actually infinite. But those digits are always changing, from 3 to 1 to 4 to 1 to 5 to 9 and so on. Likewise, if the universe is actually eternal, this does not rule out change within the universe. And second, this argument cannot be made by Christians because it leads to a theological dilemma. If someone is in heaven, or believes they will be going to heaven, then they are committed to the existence of an actual eternity, not just a potential eternity. Even though there will be no point at which they are able to say an actual eternity has passed, they must nonetheless believe they are committed to the position that they are inside an actual eternity, because anything that is not of eternal duration is of finite duration, meaning it has a beginning and an end. But Christians are precluded from believing that heaven will end, or any proposition that entails that belief, such as the proposition that they are not, in fact, inside an actual eternity. Many Christians will respond to this by invoking presentism, or the A theory of time, under which only the present is real and past and future are an illusion. But this theory is precluded by Einsteinian relativity. So there's no reason to accept this argument against the possibility of an actual infinity of time. Also, when apologists like Craig, the foremost defender of the Kalam argument, speak of something beginning to exist, they don't mean it in the sense that there was a time before that thing existed when it did not exist. But it is exactly that sense of beginning that these same apologists appeal to when they appeal to the principle of nothing comes from nothing. They want us to imagine a time at which there is nothing, and then at which there is something, and then they appeal to the absurdity of that idea. It does no good to try to derive nothing comes from nothing completely a priori, or independent of our experience, because any such attempt relies on potentiality causal models, and there is no reason to think that potentiality is required, other than as the absence of anything which precludes it, for something to come into being. So the whole concept of beginning to exist in this argument is a bait and switch. Any commitment to a singular definition of the word begins ends up substantially weakening or outright refuting one or both of the premises. I discuss this further in my series on the Kalam on this channel. Finally, Calvo, or rather Steve, goes into why this cause must be timeless and spaceless and so on, which we dealt with earlier. And Calvo closes out the chapter by saying that even if the universe was eternal, there must still be a God because we see direction in the universe, and direction requires a director. But direction does not require a director, just ask a raindrop on its way down. So that is the first of the chapters which are listed in the table of context. Again, yes, that is what Calvo calls his table of contents. I mention this just in case there is any doubt remaining in the mind of any viewer of this video that Almando Calvo, aka Christrighteous, poses no threat whatsoever to philosophical atheism. The sole useful function of this book, other than being a source of revenue for Lulu, is to serve as a repository for ideas that he found online and decided to regurgitate without actually understanding them. Without a doubt, there are Christians out there who, like Calvo, find many of these ideas compelling, and who, unlike Calvo, have not sealed themselves in an echo chamber, and are willing to hear an explanation of why they do not convincingly argue for the existence of God. Hopefully this video has been of some service to them. Certainly, it won't do Calvo any good. If you enjoyed this video and want to help my channel grow, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Be sure to hit the bell to be notified when a new video hits. And if you want to share your thoughts about Almando Calvo, aka Christrighteous, leave a comment below. My special thanks to Logicked for his contribution to this video. If you've been living in a fallout shelter and haven't already checked out his incredible content, be sure to click in the link in the description. And as always, thank you for joining me. We'll see you in the next video. I'm David John Wellman, and the rest is up to you.